Alright, so we're checking out your assignment turn-in for assignment 8 in VGD 151. So the assignment was to apply squash and stretch in a scene of your own invention. So, what we've got here is some scale happening with this cone here. It's scaling down. And then towards the end it's scaling back up again, okay? But that's actually not really squash and stretch, it's just scale at this point. So we're gonna kind of go into how we would make this into a squash and stretch animation, okay? First thing is that, the cone is kind of going through this floor plane right now, which is, probably not optimal. So, let's move this guy up a little bit. Just gonna move it back up. Something like that so that it's sitting on the floor. Okay. Now, for something like this, it's important that we have something on the bottom in the center, okay, for us to be able to place our pivot point really accurately, okay? So, the cone shape doesn't really allow for this. So it might be easier actually to start with a different type of shape. Or if we want to work with this one, we'll have to do a little more guesswork, okay? So just, be aware of that kind of thing. Since we don't know very much about this yet, and, we're still kind of learning about squash and stretch, we won't worry about it too much. And we'll just kind of eyeball things rather than placing them in a perfect center point here on the bottom, okay? So, what I'm going to do with this cone is just a simple bounce animation just to demonstrate what squash and stretch looks like and how to apply it properly, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this scaling animation that I have right here, okay? So, I'm just kind of starting from square one. So to get rid of the animation keys that we currently have, we can just right click and hold, okay? And over our key here, and just hit delete. And that's going to get rid of the key. The key was indicated by this little red tick mark, okay? So here's another key. We can click on this frame, okay, where our keyframe is. Right click and hold, and hit delete. It's going to get rid of that key. There's another one over here, but it's actually, on frame 25, so it's just past our animation here. We can move forward here by moving this gray sliding bar, okay? So we can find that key, 25 right there, and delete that. For this, I'm just going to work in the space of frame 1 through 24, so I'm not going to be working with 25 or anything beyond that at this point. We're just going to keep it simple for the purpose of demonstration and for practice, okay? So, again, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start at frame 1 here, and I'm going to move this cone up. I can press space bar to look in different views here, okay? And I'm just going to line that up on the ground, okay, so it's just touching the ground. And again, I'm just switching views using my space bar. I can just hit space bar and I get all 4 views. Then I can just hover over one of these windows, whichever one I want to enlarge, and press the space bar again, and then it pops into this nice big screen, okay? So, we've got that all taken care of. Now, one thing that I've noticed here on your cone is that the scale value is locked. Okay, this kind of gray-blue color indicates that the scale Y is locked. Alright, and that means simply that we can't just grab this scale Y handle and move it around. Okay, we can't adjust that in any way. So for something like squash and stretch, we're going to be using our scale tool quite a bit, so we don't want that to be locked. So we can just hover over scale Y right here in our channel box / layer editor, and we can right click and hold and go to unlock selected. Okay. So it turned red, which means we've still got some keys hanging out on this locked value. Okay. So again, we're just going to go along and delete these keys. Alright, the same way we deleted the others. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we have kind of a clean slate to work with. The one other interesting detail is you'll see that here in Translate Y we have a value, okay? And everything else is, zeros and ones. Ideally, we want kind of to establish a starting position for the object, okay? And then we want to kind of tell Maya that, hey, this is kind of my home base. This is where I want this thing to start out. That way, no matter where we move it, scale it, rotate it, we can always get it back to this starting position just by filling the boxes here with zeros and ones. Okay? So at the moment, if I fill the boxes with zeros and ones, we need this kind of thing, where it's kind of halfway through the ground. And we don't really want that. We want this to be our home base, where it's sitting on top of the ground. So we can change that just by coming up to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Basically, that value that you saw before is going to change to a 0, and now this is kind of our new home base. So no matter where we move this, if we rotate it around a bunch, we scale it, we do all kinds of crazy stuff with it, and we're just like, man, I don't like that. I want it to be back here sitting where it was at before, and I want it to be the same size it was before, and now it's all crazy, I don't know. You can just come over here to your channel box / layer editor, and you can fill these values with zeros for translate. That'll put it back in its starting position. You can put zeros for rotate. That will give it its starting orientation, okay? And you can put ones for scale. That's going to give it its original scale, okay? I'm just going to kind of put it back to normal. So, now that we've got that established, the next thing that we want to change is going to be the location of this pivot point for the scale tool, okay? And the reason we want to change that is because at the moment, if we scale this, not only is it going to scale in this way, it's also going to lift itself off of the ground, okay? And we don't really want it to start lifting off of the ground. It should stay firmly attached to the ground, at least until it makes a jump, okay? So, how do we deal with this? How do we make it not jump up off the ground every time we scale in Y? Because we don't want to have to always, every time we make a keyframe, have to move it down. We really just want to scale it. So what we can do is just hold down the D key, alright? Once we're holding down the D key, we can actually move this pivot point around. Now it can be a little confusing when you're in perspective mode like this. So you may want to actually look at it from the side and use this D key to move this around to right about there. Look at it from another angle, make sure it's still in its center. Look at it from the top as well and make sure it's still in the center. Okay, that's where you want it. You want it to be in this perfect center at the bottom of the cone. Okay, So now that it's there, when I scale, you can see now it scales towards the bottom and it's not lifting off of the ground whenever I scale, all right? So what I'm gonna animate for this is just a simple jump, all right? As if the excuse me, the cone, as if the cone were alive and it was just going to jump in the air, okay? So something important to know about animation is that usually before we start a movement, a large movement, it's important to kind of prepare the audience to view that movement by making some smaller movement in the opposite direction beforehand, okay? So an example of that in real life might be like a baseball pitcher, okay? When he pitches the ball, you know, we all see that big movement where he, you know, finally throws the ball, and you know, we follow his arm, follow the ball as it goes along. But beforehand, there's a whole wind-up process, you know, and there's quite a bit of time where the baseball player will move his arm back in the opposite direction of which he's going to throw, okay? He's going to pull his arm back first, and then he's going to have that powerful forward thrust as he throws the ball, okay? So that's kind of the idea here, is before we do that big motion, there's going to be a smaller motion in the opposite direction, all right? So first thing we're going to do is actually squish this a little bit, okay, in anticipation of it going to jump up, okay? So let's squash it down. So we'll just go ahead and scale this down. I'm on frame 1 right now. Oh, you know what, actually, on frame 1 I want it to be just normal, okay? So just like this. Because, you know, obviously we don't want it to start already squished. We want to see it squash down and then jump up, okay? So at the first frame, we're just going to keep it completely normal, just like this, all right? We can go ahead and grab these 3 scale values here. I just clicked and dragged, okay, to grab those. And then I can just right-click and select key selected. Okay, so now I have a key for those right here on frame 1, knowing that this scale is going to be perfectly normal at this point. I'm also going to key my translation. Now I'm not going to actually be dealing very much with rotation in this animation. Actually, I'm not going to be dealing with rotation at all. So, you know, I don't really have to worry about those. We could lock them, we could hide them, we could do, you know, all kinds of fun stuff. I'm just going to leave them there for now, okay? So I'm not going to worry about it. Just in case I decide for some reason I want to use them later, you know, there they are. So on about frame 5 here, I've just kind of moved my time slider over to frame 5. I'm going to put the cone in the squash position, okay? So I'm going to squish it down in scale Y here. But, you know, when I do that, I can't just stop with scale Y, alright? It's also going to need to go outwards in the other 2 directions, scale X and scale Z. So, you know, for this, kind of picture a water balloon and what happens when you squish a water balloon from above. You know, it's going to get shorter, yes, but it's also going to displace that water, all right, and it's going to widen around, you know, in the horizontal direction as you're squishing it, okay? And that's because that water doesn't just kind of disappear, it needs a place to go. So when you put pressure on one side, the other sides are going to expand, okay? So when you have a squish here, similarly, you're squishing it down in one direction, the other directions are going to need to expand to account for the volume and mass of this object, all right? So we'll go ahead and scale this up in the X and Z directions. We'll go 1.2 maybe, just eyeballing it. Okay, so we've rounded it out here. It's wider and shorter. And we'll just go ahead and key those, okay? And I'll key my translate as well. So squishing it down, you can see it's gotten wider at the bottom as we've squished it down. All right, so it looks like it's retaining its mass, it's just squashing, okay? And then we're gonna go ahead and choose a place for it to kind of reach the top of its jump. All right, so I'm gonna choose 12. That sounds good to me. So at 12, I'm gonna pull it up. I'm gonna say, you know, this is gonna be the top of the jump. It's gonna be right there. That's as high as it's gonna go, and gravity's gonna pull it back down again. So at that point, you know, I've changed my translate Y. I'm just gonna grab all of my translates here and key select it. All right. Another important thing to know is that at the top of the jump here, there's no longer going to be a force squishing the object. There's also not going to be a force stretching the object out, so it's just going to return to its normal shape. So we can come to scale here. We can change these all back to 1 to change it back to its normal shape. All right, we'll just grab those and key those as well. Okay, so it's squashing down and it's returning to its normal shape, you know, and it doesn't look supernatural yet. Supernatural. I don't mean that in a, you know, spooky ghost way. I just mean it doesn't look very natural, I should say. So we'll deal with that in just a moment with a stretch. Okay, but first let's kind of finish the idea that we're going with here, and that it's gonna bounce back down on the ground. Okay, it's gonna fall back down at some point. So at about frame 20, I'm gonna place it back on the ground. And we know that the ground position is 0 at this point. Okay, so 0, 0, 0 will place this back on the ground. So we can change translate Y to 0. There we go. It's sitting back on the ground again. And we can just go ahead and key that. Okay. And we can key our scale too, since we're working with scale as well. So it's jumping up and it's coming back down. Okay, great. You know, one thing about this is that it's staying squished kind of a little too long. Okay, it's just slowly coming back to its original shape there. Okay, so what should happen to really make this animation a little snappier is that shortly after it launches off the ground, it should actually stretch a little bit to really emphasize that pickup of speed, okay, that it's doing. So let's go ahead and stretch it. So, you know, if for a squash we're scaling down in Y and up in X and Z, you can imagine for a stretch it's going to be the exact opposite situation, where we're scaling up in Y and scaling down in X and Z. Alright, so I'll start doing that. And I'm here on frame 8, right in between that squash and that arc of the jump, where it's returning to its original shape before falling back down. Okay, so we're kind of halfway between that. So again, I'm going to make scale Y a little bigger. I'm going to make scale X and scale Z a little smaller so that it's still retaining its original mass. Okay, we'll key that. I'm going to leave translate alone this time. We kind of have translate already taken care of. So it's squashing down, stretching out, and then it's returning to its original shape there. And then we can actually stretch it out again right here. okay? As it's falling down, it may stretch a little bit as well. Now, in real life, if things squishing down and stretching out like this, not necessarily, but when we see this kind of thing in animation, it really helps our eyes follow what's going on, kind of tricks our eyes, okay? So again, we'll stretch this out. And I'll key those. Jumping up. Okay. So at that point, maybe this is a little bit too much with the stretch. So I think I actually like it better without the stretch. So, I can just delete this key if I decide I don't need it. Alright, so jumping up, stretching out. There we go. Landing on the ground. And, after it lands on the ground, it just stops instantly. And, that's a little abrupt, actually, for what you want, okay? So you might want to actually come in after the fact. So maybe on frame 22, and just give it a little tiny residual bounce, all right? So on frame 22 here, maybe we'll squash it down just a little bit, okay? Not quite as dramatic as before it jumped, okay? So just a little small adjustment. And we'll just key that. And then at 24 we can return it back to its normal shape to kind of end our animation. So squishing down, jumping up, falling back down again, and a little bit of residual bounce there, so that isn't quite so abrupt. Boink. There we go. Now another thing that'll help make the animation a little bit snappier is to come up to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and check out some of our animations in the Graph Editor. This is just kind of a visual representation of our animation, okay? So this at the bottom is our timeline, representing our timeline. You can see this red line will move along as we scrub our timeline. So we can kind of see where we're at in time. And this represents different values. Each of the lines is assigned to one of the values on this cone that we've been working with, okay? So we can see translate X here, which is a straight flat line, so it's really actually not doing anything. So, we don't actually even need these translate X keys since they're not doing anything. So I can delete those. I just hit Command X on my keyboard. If you're on a PC, it would be Control X, I believe. Translate Z similarly is not doing anything, so we don't really need those. Translate Y is doing a bunch of stuff, so you can see basically what we're seeing here is going to mirror what we see the cone doing. So we can see it's flat at this point, it's not going up. Then as soon as we see that curve, the sphere is traveling up, it's reaching this plateau up here, and coming back down, okay? So something of interest to note here is that anywhere that you're seeing kind of a more flat line, okay, flattened out line means that the speed of the animation is kind of slowing down at that point, okay? There's not a lot of change happening. Anywhere that you're seeing pretty vertical lines, or more vertical lines, that's where a lot of change is happening, so the animation has a lot of speed at this point, okay? So basically you have your cone here, slowly jumping up, picking up speed until it comes to the top and slows down a little bit as as gravity sort of sets in. Then as it's falling, it's picking up speed, but just before it hits the ground here, it's actually slowing down. Okay, this curve is becoming more flat, indicating that there's a slowdown happening here. So in real life, obviously things that are falling do not tend to slow down before they hit the ground. They just go faster in most cases. Or they reach terminal velocity, but all that stuff aside, it's not going to slow down. So this animation curve is actually a little bit incorrect, and it's, people are sometimes prone to notice that kind of thing. They might not even notice what it is that seems off about the animation, but they probably will notice that something seems a little bit weird about it. Our eyes are really trained to pick up on things like that. Okay, so let's change this a little bit. First of all, we don't really need this. Okay, because there's no change happening here. We don't really need this first guy. Okay, because really our animation that we're concerned with is starting right here. Okay. So we'll go to frame 5, and what we can do to kind of alleviate this problem is just grab one of these keyframes. I just clicked and dragged to grab that. And then I can grab one of these handles, this one right here. Okay, just clicking on it to grab it. And then with my mouse hovering over it, I'll click and drag again. And it changes to this little 4-way arrow. And I can actually adjust this curve. Now I don't want to go like this, go over, because that's going to cause some pretty crazy stuff to happen, but something right about like that, okay? So that we can see that our jump is starting pretty speedy, and it's slowing down as gravity begins to take effect, okay? And on the other side, we kind of want the same thing. So we'll grab this, grab the handle here, click and drag, and we'll change it to something like that, okay? So now we've got this speedy jump up, slowing down as gravity begins to take effect, and then we're speeding up as we start to fall faster and faster until we hit the ground. Okay, so let's check that out. Twink. It might be a pretty subtle difference at first, but it really does help that animation pop a lot better. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so those are kind of some of the basics of the principles of squash and stretch. So try and apply that knowledge. Just the basic takeaways here. Most important things to pay attention to are that kind of wind up action before moving into another action, or those little bounces that you get as something is landing. But the biggest thing to kind of notice about squash and stretch at this point is that when you squish something down, the mass of the object will have to move outward. Okay, so you need to adjust all 3 of these scale values. And when you stretch it out, the same principle applies. When you are stretching it in one direction, it's going to have to come inwards in the other directions to make up for the displaced matter, okay? So let me know if you have any questions about anything that we went over today. Thanks for watching, and happy animating.